Hello, my name's Karen Dingwall. I'm Métis from the Métis Nation of Alberta, and I'm going to be reading page 66 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the section called Regulation. The residential school system operated with few regulations. Those that did exist were in large measure weakly enforced. The Canadian government never developed anything approaching the Education Acts and regulations by which provincial governments administered public schools. The key piece of legislation used in regulating the residential school system was the Indian Act. This was a multi-purpose piece of legislation that defined and limited First Nations life in Canada. The Act contained no education-related provisions until 1884. There were no residential school-specific regulations until 1894. These dealt almost solely with attendance and truancy. It was recognized by those who worked within the system that the level of regulation was inadequate. In 1897, Indian Affairs Education official Martin Benson wrote, "No regulations have been adopted or issued by the department applicable to all its schools, as had been done by the provincial governments." The situation did not improve over time. The education section of the 1951 Indian Act and the residential school regulations adopted in 1953 were each only 4 pages in length. By comparison, the Manitoba Public Schools Act of 1954 was 91 pages in length. In addition to the Act, the Manitoba government had adopted 19 education-related regulations. It is also apparent that many key people within the system had little knowledge of the existing rules and regulations. In 1922, an Indian agent in Hagersville, Ontario, inquired of departmental headquarters if there had been any changes in the regulations regarding education since the adoption of a set of education regulations in 1908. His question suggests he was completely unaware of major changes to the Indian Act regarding education that had supplanted previous regulations in 1920. In 1926, J.K. Irwin, the newly appointed principal of the Gordon School in Saskatchewan, discovered upon taking office that he could not find any laid-down regulations as to the duties and powers of a principal of an Indian boarding school. He wrote to Indian Affairs asking for a copy of such regulations, since he wanted to know exactly what I am to do and what powers I have. Departmental Secretary J.D. McLean informed him that there are no printed regulations concerning the duties and powers of the principal of an Indian residential school. The system was so unregulated that in 1968, after Canada had been funding residential schools for 101 years, Indian Affairs Deputy Minister J.A. MacDonald announced, "For the first time, we have set down in a precise and detailed manner the criteria which is to be used in future in determining whether or not an Indian child is eligible for these institutions." Thank you.